I think it's really important, and I think it's tough. I mean, I don't have kids, at least yet, and it's one of those where, again, looking at family dynamics, and I've worked with a lot of business owners, and it's interesting. It's not uncommon that I would work with someone who sold a business for $50 million, and they were driving a beat up pickup truck, and their kids had brand new Mercedes, and it was one of those where it's. If you grow up a very middle class existence, let's say, and you make something of yourself, it's easy to fall into the, okay, well, I want to provide my kids everything that I didn't have. And sometimes by doing that, you rob them of the journey, you rob them of the struggle. And there's so much good stuff in the struggle.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Ryan Sterling, who wrote the book, You're Making Other People Rich. And we're going to learn why. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. I have 2 quotes from Ryan's book to share. The first quote is from Dakota Fanning. I think my generation is obsessed with instant gratification. We want everything now, now, now. The second quote is from Seneca, which means it's thousands of years old. It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. We're really going to dig into this today. Listen in to the money stories and see who was the happiest and what was the most enjoyable parts. Before we do that, let's review last week's action step from Bob Johansson, which was to look around and see what's happening, and then take the time to think about it. We're in a world that's evolving and changing faster than you can imagine, and you will either change and evolve or be left behind. The rules also keep changing, so it's best to be aware. It's early January. I hope you haven't given up on your goals like most people. I'm starting my 12-week year for this quarter. Goals are to understand options trading in a better way, and my investment planning, and how to do that in a changing economic climate. And hopefully we'll have some cool guests to come on and chat about that as we dig deeper. Today, we're going to learn about money and how it's not going to make us happy. It's funny how we all want what someone else has. I've talked about this before, and we need to define what we want and go get it. Too many people are living other people's dreams. Our guest is Ryan Sterling. He's the founder of Future You Wealth. He's a successful wealth manager and sought-after holistic wealth coach, speaker, and published author of You're Making Other People Rich. As a financial advisor, he challenges and inspires people to live life on their terms by taking accountability and action over their wealth. Ryan's worked personally with thousands of people to help from being a consumer of stuff to an owner of capital and life on their terms. He's been featured in many media outlets, including Business Insider, CNN Money, HuffPost, and he is a TEDx speaker. Let's meet our guest. Welcome to Rich Your Soul, Ryan Sterling. It's great to have you join us today.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm excited to learn from you. Let's start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
I've had an interesting vantage point with respect to money for most of my life, in that my parents grew up in two very different backgrounds. My mother grew up in a pretty affluent environment. Her grandfather started and sold a business in the 50s. Her father was an investment banker. She grew up in one of the nicer suburbs of Chicago. Had a BMW when she was at the age of 16. Had access to all the country clubs, etc. My father was a very, very, very different upbringing. He was very middle class. Both parents were union employees, worked for the city of Chicago, 7 kids. And it was one of those where it was a one car in the family. When they took vacations, they packed everybody in the station wagon and would drive to Florida and all stay in the same hotel room. So it was interesting growing up to. We didn't live too far from Chicago. I grew up outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And, I can remember, for example, going to like a Father's Day celebration and going to a McDonald's on the west side of Chicago with my dad's family and ending up the night having dinner at one of the most exclusive country clubs on the North Shore of Chicago. So from a very young age, I was very aware of money and the different types of lifestyles that money could provide and afford.
And that's quite interesting because you saw both up close and up front at the same point. What did that kind of leave you with from a thinking standpoint about money?
It was very confusing in a way because, on the one hand, I'll tell you, like my mom's dad, he had a Ferrari, he had a couple of Porsches, he had a huge house. And, so on the one hand, it was, being very impressed with all of that. But on the other, it's funny, the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off was on TV last week, and it took place in the area that my mom grew up in. And there was a line from the movie that kind of reminded me about going to my mom's parents' house that it was like a museum. So, while I was impressed with the size of the house and the fancy cars, I also felt like you couldn't touch anything. And as a kid, you had to be very careful. And if anything was out of place, so someone could lose their mind. Where on my dad's side, it was a lot of fun, right? We had free reign of the house. We would be on the computer one minute, and we'd be digging up the yard the next minute. It was so it was one of those where I was impressed with money, but at the same time, I also felt I could also feel the burden of it at the same time, and I could feel almost it was very exclusive versus my dad's side. I felt very inclusive.
How did your dad get along with that money story with your mom?
It's a really interesting point. So even though my father grew up in a very middle class upbringing, he went to Harvard Business School. So he was someone who was very motivated by money and someone that really wanted to make something of himself. And it was interesting because, again, he had the Harvard Business School background, but he was a classic entrepreneur at a time where being an entrepreneur wasn't really a thing. So it was funny growing up because the friends of mine, their parents were teachers, doctors, attorneys, kind of a traditional career path. And people had asked me what my father did. And said he was an entrepreneur, and people said, well, what's that? And this is before the time of Shark Tank. So people didn't necessarily do that. It wasn't something that, it was somewhat unique in the cohort of my close friends. But I will say that it was interesting, my dad, again, having the Harvard Business School background, motivated by money, trying to build a company, but also having the middle class upbringing. It was very confusing, to be honest with you, in the sense that we ended up living in a nice community outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Again, my dad's business started taking off. But there was definitely my dad's a very frugal guy. And again, starting a business, you don't necessarily have a lot of disposable income all the time. So it was one of those where, even though we were upwardly mobile, it very much, in many respects, felt like we were living a very middle-class existence.
And did your parents talk about money with you, or even amongst themselves?
My dad kind of ran the show. I think there was something about my dad and his upbringing that appealed to my mom. I think because, again, there was such it was an environment where, even though she had nice things, it was you could break things, and it was a very tense environment in many respects. So I think in certain respects that my dad and his upbringing was somewhat attractive to my mom. And I think that my mom, I'll give her a lot of credit. She went from, again, having everything she ever wanted to living on a pretty tight budget as my dad was trying to get some of these companies off the ground. And she never complained about it, but it was definitely run. My dad ran the show. My dad is a fiercely frugal person. So it was one of those where I know that I would just look at my friends and I would see just the conveniences they had. And I feel like everything that we did was done in a very, again, a frugal way, and kind of cutting corners to save every single penny. And I think it definitely caused tension after a while. But I think for the longest time, my mom just kind of went with the flow.
And was he eventually successful with his business, and things changed, or?
I'm the oldest of three. And when I was in elementary school and middle school, I could definitely see that things were tight. Again, we were upwardly mobile. So it was always one of those where I think my dad was very confident that something was going to hit. So we always had what we needed. But I definitely was very aware that we were living on a very tight budget. That changed when I was in high school. And we lived in a much bigger house. We were in a much nicer neighborhood. Well, my mom had a Mercedes for the first time. But the business did finally hit. But I will say, though, and this is the interesting thing about money, that I don't think my life was any better, though, as a kid growing up in that environment. In many respects, I missed the more middle-class neighborhood that we lived in.
What was it that you missed about it?
There was it was a closer connection. It was one of those where, we shared a driveway with our neighbor. And we had a swing set in our yard. Our neighbor had a basketball hoop. Another neighbor had a tire swing. And it was just kind of free reign of the neighborhood, where it wasn't uncommon that everyone would be outside, and, just a random, hey, let's go outside and play, turned into, 20 people from the neighborhood together in this community. When we moved to the bigger house, we had more land. All of our neighborhoods had more land. There was no community. It was all, fences, everything blocked off from each other. And it was one of those where, if I happened to ever walk through someone's yard, let's say, it was like a federal offense. So it was just much more. And again, I use the term exclusive versus inclusive. So the more middle class neighborhood just felt way more inclusive. The nicer, more affluent neighborhood felt exclusive.
And I've seen that in many neighborhoods. Some people are just so uptight. And it's the reason we actually chose not to move to a particular neighborhood in our area. I was like, I don't want to live around people like that. We don't live in we live in an upper middle class neighborhood, but we've made the intention of making a community. And so we get together with the neighbors on purpose. Like the adults get together, so the kids get together. And people are a little bit more laid back. I couldn't imagine living with so much turmoil as some of those people do. And so much, it's just, it's no fun living like that.
It wasn't. And again, I'm someone, it's funny, I'm more introverted by nature. And it felt very much like we lost that sense of community when we moved again to a more exclusive area.
And that's not surprising. How did your families get along? Did you notice certain things or experience certain things of people saying something about the other side, knowing that there were these vast financial differences?
There was tension. There's no doubt. Yeah, it was. My mom's dad can be very controlling when it comes to money, and my dad, again, growing up a middle class family, one of 7 kids, independence was valued. And you were basically told from a young age that, look, you turn 18, you're out of the house, you're on your own. You figure out college on your own. You figure out all this stuff on your own. And he very much did. So I think my father and his family were people that very much valued independence. And my mom's family was one where there was a lot of control around money. And I think there was definitely a lot of tension between my father and my grandfather, because again, my grandfather wanted to be the person that controlled everything, and my father wouldn't allow it. So there's definitely tension.
So how did you figure, like, did you kind of leave on your own at 18 and go off?
It's funny you say that. So I definitely could feel the tension. I think one thing that, I don't know if this is being the oldest or what it is, but I always had a hyper awareness to it all. I had an awareness of the role that money played in our family, about the tensions, etc. And I was someone that was fiercely independent. So, for example, when I was in high school, I mentioned that things had changed. The businesses really started to take off, and we had money, and we lived in a really nice house, and I was given a car at the age of 16, and everything was taken care of. And I remember when I was 16 years old and I was able to work, I got a job as a dishwasher at a Chinese restaurant. And part of it is I really wanted a job. And I remember my mother telling me, "Oh, no, Ryan, you don't need to get a job." And I said, "Well, I kind of want my own money." And she was like, "Well, how much would you make? How much were you making an hour?" And I think I was making like $5.15, something like that. And she goes, "Well, how about I pay you for the number of hours you'd work, and I'll just give you the money." And I said no. And I wanted to make my own money. And I ended up going from the Chinese restaurant to, I worked in a food court, to then a bakery. And it was one of those where I really, at a young age, I valued my own independence when it came to money. I loved making my own money. I loved being able to go where I wanted to go and do what I wanted to do and not rely on my parents. So while my parents paid for college, I was very much the mindset that when I graduate, I am going to be financially independent. I am not going to depend on my parents for anything. And I don't know if I just inherited that from my father, or if I just saw the control on my mother's side of the family. And for me, I just knew at a young age, I just did not want to be controlled by money or anything.
And that's good. I mean, we all learn our money habits growing up, and it's cool that you got to see both sides and see the pluses and minuses of it. And then now you're a financial planner currently, correct? And yet, because when I read your book, and we're going to get to your book in a minute, I noticed something, which was you talked about the irony of managing other people's money, but struggling with your own. What did you mean by that?
You mentioned my background, that I grew up with a fiercely frugal father. And I have to say, I love my dad, and there are a lot of funny stories about my dad's frugality. But at the same time, a lot of times it really was a pain, and it was really embarrassing, where everything was done in you couldn't just get the new thing. It was like, no, wait a second. And instead of getting the new thing, we're going to go and buy something not even secondhand, third hand, but fourth hand, right? And it was just, things never felt like we were just going through the front door. There was always 3 side doors that we were going through to save an extra buck. So when I first started working, again, my dad was an entrepreneur, but I ended up getting a job. I was attracted to money and finance, and I ended up getting a job in wealth management right out of college. And I was making money. And it felt really good to have disposable income. And then being independent, I could do things the way that I wanted to do them. I could actually get new things. I could buy new clothes. I could have the new TV. I could drive whatever car I wanted. And I think what was a rebellion from my childhood, and again, have everything going through the side door, I really wanted to go through the front door with everything. But at the same time, money became a proxy for my self-worth. I'm a competitive person. I like sports. And I think my competitive drive turned into, well, money is now going to be the thing that defines me and the thing that I'm going to be competitive with. And it's interesting because when you think about sports, if you're in a sporting event, you know when there's a winner or a loser. You know when you're better than somebody else. You know when you've won the game or the season. But with money, it's not as easy because unless you're, on the Forbes list, it would be a faux pas to walk around with your net worth tattooed on your chest or on a t-shirt. But we do it in other ways. We show it in the cars that we drive, the watches that we wear, the clothes that we wear, the restaurants we frequent. And because money was so much of a proxy of my self-worth, I became a victim to a phenomenon known as lifestyle creep. And it was every time I earned more money, it was an invitation to develop more expensive habits, to, again, go to nicer clubs and restaurants, to have nicer clothes, to have nicer watches, to drive a luxury car. And every time I made an extra 100,000, my expenses went up by 120,000. And the irony is I was managing money for people. So I was helping people achieve their wealth goals and to be responsible with money. And for the longest time, I also should mention that I worked in high net worth wealth management. So I was working with it wasn't uncommon that my clients, had 10 to 100, I've worked with billionaires before. So, these were also people where it was more on the investing side, was earlier in my career. So I was good at working with my clients. I was good at my job, but I was terrible at managing my own money. And that's just because, again, so much of the stuff was a proxy of my self-worth.
So how did you get out of that? So
it was a process that really started with a couple of things. This was around 4 years ago or so, and I was where I wanted to be in my career in terms of where I initially set out. I was a senior vice president at a large investment management firm, and I was working in their high net worth group. My typical client was 5 or 10 million and above in investable assets. I was checking all of the boxes. I was hitting all of the benchmarks, and I was at an income level that 10 years earlier, I defined as I made it number. So when I hit that number, that's when I'm going to really, really make it. And I was there. And I was not happy. My wife and I, we were in this cycle of consumption. It was just, again, constantly the high-end restaurants, clothes, shoes, accessories. I mean, you name it. We were consumers of nice things. But we were unhappy. We were losing personal connection. We didn't feel good. We didn't feel healthy. And really what started was we ended up first really focusing on our health. And we started eating cleaner, and just kind of as an experiment. And when we started eating cleaner, it really provided a sense of clarity. We were just feeling better. We were more active. We started working out more. When that then started to happen, we sat down and we just looked at our life and we said, are we living the life that we want to live? Are we designing a life, or are we living a life that was designed for us? And we sat down and really thought about answering the question, what do we want? But our wants, they have to have two constraints. They can't be material things, and it can't be more money. So what do we want? Again, can't be material, and it can't be more money. And just talking about how we wanted to have a closer personal connection. We were drifting apart at that time. We wanted to feel healthier. We wanted more independence. We wanted more autonomy. We wanted to have more control over our life. We wanted more independence. And I keep going back to that independence theme. And it was one of those where we looked at this and we said, so we haven't designed a life. We have fallen into a life that was designed for us. We were told to like certain things. We were told that we have to live this way. We are letting our ego drive the way that we're spending our money, as opposed to using money as a resource to live our best, most intentional life. So it really started with starting to go down a path of getting healthier, but then also just really thinking about, and I say we tapped on the brakes, and the best, I think, metaphor to use is we were driving down the freeway, we were in the left lane, we were going fast, we were checking off all the mile marks. And then at one point we said, wait a second, are we going in the right direction? And we tapped on the brakes, we got in the right lane, and we basically got off the first off ramp. And we stopped and we got out a map and a compass and said, okay, is this the direction we want to go? Yes or no? And that's when it really started to say, okay, wait a second, I think we might want something different.
And there's a quote in your book that I think kind of encapsulates that, which is, the money you have gives you freedom. The money you pursue enslaves you. Mm-hmm. And so there's that fine balance between the two. So when you started making these changes, what happened to the people around you? Did you feel resistance?
Yeah, and part of it actually, and it's a really good question, because things did change where relationships changed. I started looking around at the people that I worked with, and it was interesting because I mentioned that, I'd hit my I made a number, the number where 10 years earlier I defined that, hey, when I hit this, that's going to be the spot. But then I was able, I stopped and I looked at the people who were at this point in my life, then 10 years older than I was. And I looked and I said, let me look at their life, where they're living, how they're living, kids in private schools, the massive houses in the suburbs, the country club dues, etc. And number one, I said, wait, I don't want to be them. I don't want to be I don't want my 10-year-old self to be that person. Nothing against them, they're great people, but I just didn't want that. I look at some friends of mine that were big spenders, and people where when you were with them, they were just talking about material things, and they were judging you and them and other people based on material things. And I had to cut some relationships out of my life. And part of it was, again, thinking I want to live a healthier life. I want to live an abundant life. I want independence. I want freedom. And I wasn't getting it from some of the crowds I was hanging out with. So I definitely had to start shutting some people down.
And that's an important thing. I don't think people realize you do have to pick. I mean, you took the time to be intentional. What do I want out of life? And then you've got to change your surroundings and the people that surround you with to make sure that those people and the life you're living with is in congruence with what you decide you want out of life. And the reality is, for lack of a better term, living a museum life where everything looks perfect, but you can't essentially do anything. You're trapped, and you're stuck in judgment, and you're stuck in all of these negative things with ego. And it isn't fun.
It's not. And I will say, though, some of these people are back in my life now, but there's boundaries. And people that I like and people that I think at the core are really good people. But, I've been able to detach from a lot of these, it being ego driven with respect to money and how it defines me. And I think now that I've been able to get a better relationship with money and define everything on my own terms, I've been able to let those people back, but again, with boundaries. And I think that's really important because it's not necessarily completely cutting people out. Sometimes it's just providing, hey, maybe I need some guardrails for the time being.
And that's true. So what inspired you to write the book, You're Making Other People Rich?
So it was a couple of things. So, I mentioned, I gave the metaphor of we were driving down the freeway, we were in the left lane, and then we said, wait a second, are we going the direction we want to go? And we started to slow down. And the reason I brought that up is I think this book and I think some of the decisions that I made at that point are important to touch on here. And we didn't just slam on the brakes and blow up our life and go a different direction. It was a long process. When we came to this realization that, wait a second, we're living a life that was defined for us, we talked about, my wife and I, we talked about, we need to repair our personal balance sheet. And and we're not going to make a change immediately with respect to our work. But we need to really start planning for when do we want to make this change from being corporate employees to owning our own business and living a life again more on our terms. So we gave ourselves 2 years. And we said, we're going to be 2 years where we're going to keep doing the status quo from a work side, but we're going to change how our spending habits, et cetera. And, so I'm the type of person where I realized one thing that I was missing at that point in my life was personal growth. And I realized that when I was younger, one of the things that always lit me up and got me so excited was when I was growing as a person, when I was experiencing new challenges, when I was trying something new, again, that competitive side of me, where that competitive drive of mine turned into, again, using money as a proxy. And now that I was, again, detaching from that, I needed some sort of challenges. So the first thing I did was I signed up for a marathon. And I wasn't a runner, but I decided I wanted to be a runner. And again, because of my competitive drive, I said, if I'm going to be a runner, I'm doing a marathon. So I put a marathon on the calendar. I said, I'm starting to train for the marathon. Another thing that I decided was, you know what? I'm so excited. I'm feeling so good. We're starting to design our life. We're going to start moving in this direction towards a life that's designed for us, not by us. I kind of want to journal this. I want to document it. So the book really started with my own writings just for myself to really kind of define my relationship with money, to figure out what was holding me back before, and to kind of figure out the direction that I wanted to go. So the first 2/3 of the book was really just kind of my own personal diary that I ended up kind of repurposing for the book to not be about me, but to help other people.
And that's a lot of times that's how our stories come out, right? It's about, documenting ourselves and then realizing the world would love to hear our story and to share that. And as I read the book, it's funny because there was something that you mentioned is if you can't be thankful for everything you have right now, nothing will ever be enough. And I think it was a lawyer in the book had $20 million, horrible health, right? And still not happy. Would you share a little bit of that story?
Yeah, I have a number of stories from some of my wealthiest clients that were in a prison of their own creation, and that's also one of the things why I love this business, because I really appreciate the question you asked at the beginning with respect to my own background, because money and family dynamics and personal dynamics is so fascinating. So the story is I was working with a client. He's an attorney. Mid-sized law firm in a city outside of New York City where I live. And he was the president of the law firm, and he was doing really well in his life. He had 20 million net worth. He was, and the law firm was growing, but he was absolutely miserable. And when we sat down with him one meeting, he looked tired. He had bags under his eyes. He was overweight. And he really opened up to us and said, gosh, I hate my job. I really hate what I'm doing. I never wanted to be an attorney in the first place, but he had 3 kids, and he was just like, I had to pay the bills, and I was good at it, but he's like, I'm tired of it. And he was late 50s, and he said, his son was a Division I tennis player. And he said, gosh, I would just love to be able to just like travel, watch my son play college tennis. I miss most of his high school matches. And I just really want to, I just really want to spend more time with him. And we said, well, okay, you can do it. Like you can go, you can resign tomorrow. You have enough saved up, you can do whatever you want with your time. And he goes, no, I can't. And we said, why? He goes, I need a private plane. We said, well, like, why do you need a private plane? He goes, all of my clients, all of the people in my community, all of the people that are really successful have their own private planes. And I will not be a success until I have my own private plane. And we said, okay, wait, this is absolutely ridiculous. And he goes, no, this isn't ridiculous. He's like, I need to know when my time is done, I need to know that I made something of myself, that I was successful. And this is the guy who's $20 million. He's the president of a mid-sized law firm. And for him, that having a private plane was the definition of success. That in this cohort of people he's surrounded with, he was the person who was the poorest out of the people that he spent time with on a day-to-day basis. And for him, he wasn't able to live his life until he had that plane. And the crazy thing is, when number one, he's going to have to work for his entire life, to the rest of his life, to get that private plane. And he knows that. Number two, when he finally gets that plane, guess what's going to happen? Got to be enough. There's always going to be something else, or he's going to have the private plane in the hangar, or it is going to be some other new thing that he's searching for. And it was one of those where it's such an eye-opening moment where this guy has all of the money in the world, more money than most people are ever going to see, and he's someone that feels poor.
Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man Podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man Podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. So did he change, or is he still chasing his plane?
I don't work with him anymore, but he's still chasing the plane as far as I can see.
And one day he'll have the plane. He'll probably have a heart attack and crash the thing.
That's exactly what's going to happen. And, it's interesting. I'll tell you one, this isn't in the book. I'll tell you another really interesting example. So I worked with a client. Again, I don't work with him anymore, but he family business and a pretty large private business. Grandparents started it. His parents ran it, and he was third generation. And I mean, he had everything he ever needed, all the private schools, the Ivy League schools. He graduated. He, had a quote unquote job in the family business, but never really did. And, he had an ownership stake in it just through some estate planning. And, he was a guy at the age of 23 years old. He had a Ferrari. He was, houses all over the world. And long story short, fast forward, he's in his 50s now, and the business was sold. And he was getting liquid around $700 million liquid. And he was a good guy at the core, but he was super volatile. I mean, he would fly off the rails, and you could see just a really unsettled person. And at one of our meetings, he asked me, he goes, so you worked at Goldman Sachs, right? I said, yeah. And he goes, and you got there out of business school, right? I said, yeah. And he goes, so talk about the process of going from business school to Goldman Sachs. So did they do an on-campus session? I said, yes. Okay, did they come then to interview on campus? I said, yes. He goes, so then you made it through those rounds, and then were you invited to a super day in New York? I said, yes. Goes, okay, so then you have a super day, you're competing against all these other business school students, and then you probably had another round. I said, yes. So then he goes, you go through the internship, and it's probably a really competitive internship. I said, yes, right, against people from all the top schools. And ultimately, he was checking off all of it. He knew the process every single step along the way. And when we finally, finished, and I ended up working at Goldman Sachs out of business school, he slammed his hand on the table, and he goes, that is something I will never have. And I said, what? He goes, the uncertainty, the not knowing if it's going to work out, the having to fight for my position at a place like a Goldman Sachs. He goes, I will never have that. So here I am. I'm someone that I'm struggling to pay back business school debt and, just struggling with my own relationship with money. And I'm sitting across from someone that has $700 million liquid, and I have something that he'll never have.
Kids need to learn, right, to stand on their own 2 feet. And if you take that away, you essentially take away their self-worth.
100%. No doubt.
And he will probably spend his life in a psychiatrist chair.
That's right. Chasing something.
Chasing
and again,
something.
That's where, again, the relationship with money fascinates me. So I'm seeing these case studies and I'm going through it in my own personal life. And I'm saying, okay, something's not right. so it's like I have something wrong. And these people that I'm surrounding myself with that have all of the money in the world, they're living an unsettled existence. So that's where I was able to say, okay, let me take the off ramp and let's take out our map. Let's take our compass and let's start designing a life of meaning and purpose. And intentionally.
And so I know people who own very large corporations, family owned, and they've actually taken a very different approach in the sense that, number one, they won't hire their kids. Like, if you want to be in the family business, you first have to go out and create success on your own. Only then will we talk to you and allow you to come in and see if there's a place for you within the company. They run it like a business, and just because you're born into the family doesn't give you the right to walk in the door. They are very, very intentional and direct with that. And I think, unfortunately, most people who have built wealth spent all their time building wealth, and they didn't spend time with their kids teaching them the lessons that they needed to learn about life, or they, like your mom, we do the wrong thing in trying to make it easy for our kids. Like, don't wash dishes. Here's cash. And it hurts us because essentially you're no longer free. And that's what you wanted. You wanted the freedom to know that you could be your own man.
I think it's really important. And I think it's tough. I mean, I don't have kids, at least yet. And it's one of those where, again, looking at family dynamics, and I've worked with a lot of business owners, and it's interesting. It's not uncommon that I would work with someone who sold a business for $50 million, and they were driving a beat up pickup truck, and their kids had brand new Mercedes, and it was one of those where it's, if you grow up a very middle class existence, let's say, and you make something of yourself, it's easy to fall into the, okay, well, I want to provide my kids everything that I didn't have. And sometimes by doing that, you rob them of the journey, you rob them of the struggle. And there's so much good stuff in the struggle.
So I like you grew up in seeing the multitude of, money to no money to massive wealth, but we also saw generational changes. And one of the biggest things that I learned as a kid is, if you hand the kids money, you're ruining their life. And so we were very intentional with our kids because we knew that up front. It was like, you've got to create this balance, and you've got to create that friction for them, and it's difficult because literally the first time my kids flew, they flew first class. But yet we were very intentional in ensuring that they had to learn to grow up. So there's a funny saying in our house, our parents are rich, but we're broke.
Yeah.
So we've been very intentional in keeping them safe, keeping them protected, but also giving them the ability to figure out their own way and to get jobs and to have their own money, because it gives them that that sense. And now they're both in college and they're making my son's like, I'm not going to go sit on campus and spend all that money to sit in a dorm room to watch things on Zoom. I can stay home and save all that money. So he gets it. My daughter is very much the same way. She's in New York City, but she's learning how to live her life in the big city and figuring out how to do it cost effectively and how to get jobs that pay really well and, learning all those types of skills. So they know we're there behind them, but they also know that the expectation is you're on your own. You've got to figure this out, but we'll help you and we'll give you the tools to kind of go forward.
I think you're doing things the right way. And again, I think it's one of those where it is easy to to just want to solve the problems. And I think about this, I use a lot of metaphors. So using like marathon training as a metaphor, running a marathon, you're in a lot of pain at mile 16 and you have 10 more miles to go. Mile 16 is not fun. But every time, if you complained, if my parents or my wife or anyone said, oh, you're in pain, you know what, we're going to drive you to the finish line. It has no meaning. Right? I could collect the medal and I could put up, but it has no personal meaning to me. The reason a marathon has so much meaning to me is because on mile 16, I said no to the pain and I didn't give it a voice and I kept moving forward. And I don't care about them. My medals are in my closet. I don't put them up because when I think about, again, running a marathon and accomplishing that, I remember running a number since my first one. I'm kind of obsessed with it now. It's the meaning behind it, not the medal. And so often, especially in today's society, we rob people of the journey and instead just drive them to the finish line and give them a medal. And thinking that that's what we should be doing because we want to, again, avoid seeing your kids in pain. But ultimately, you're robbing them of that really important and meaningful journey.
And that's very true. So you've been around a lot of people who've made a lot of money. How do you make money? Like, what's the secret to building that kind of wealth?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because when I look at the people who have made a lot of money, that they didn't inherit it, the ones that actually truly made it, the irony of it. I feel like it's the people that actually detached from using money as a proxy for their self-worth and instead were really focused on building something. They were really in the process. I feel like it's people that have a high tolerance for things not always working out and for having challenges and roadblocks that you have to get through. A tolerance for getting sued, a tolerance for people screwing you over, a tolerance for having the economy turn out of your favor. And it's one of those where the people that I've seen make a lot of money through exits are the ones that they're less focused on the destination and they're really in the process of just growth and growing it. And ultimately, again, it's fascinating seeing a lot of these, family examples that I've worked with where the generation that made the money, oftentimes it's not always, but oftentimes it is people who are, from very middle class or even lower class upbringings that really had. They didn't have the private schools. They didn't necessarily have the Ivy League pedigree. They didn't necessarily have all the doors open to the high-end firms on Wall Street. So they kind of had to create something on their own. And one thing led to another. And again, being in that constant growth mode, not just giving up at the first setback, not feeling the fear of, oh my God, what if I get sued? Or what if the economy turns my way or turns against me? Those are the people that I've seen make hundreds of millions of dollars. And the funny thing about it is they make hundreds of millions and then they spend the next part of their life trying to figure out how to give it to their kids and to get rid of it. And it was one of those, again, I keep going back to the vantage point that I have with money. I did start to notice that the people that seemed the happiest and the most fulfilled were the ones that were really focused on the journey, not the destination. And once they got to the destination, it was giving their medals away. And I'm using medals as a metaphor, of course, but it was, okay, I made 100 million. Okay, now how do I give 90 of it away to my kids tax-free?
Have you been around long enough to see what the outcome of that is, of giving it to the kids?
A lot of times it's not good. And again, when I say not good, it's, the kids are taken care of and they live nice lives and their kids go to the best schools. But a lot of time you definitely see resentment. You definitely see a lack of confidence. You definitely see people who aren't terribly fulfilled. Not all the time. But more often than not, I can tell you, I always felt bad for generation, always.
Yeah. So as an immigrant, we call that Generation 3, which is what my kids were. The first generation comes here. They work really hard. They create the foundation. And they're the ones who do that. And then the second generation, because they had been given a strong foundation really become super successful. And then generation 3 is the one that blows it all. And it goes back to the big, it's a circle. And so it's kind of along those lines. And it's the same concept. It's just slightly different. And it's funny, you keep talking about these private schools and these prestigious universities, and we walked away from all of that. Like,
I love it.
We specifically stayed away from certain schools because I was like, I don't want my kids around people who are judging everything they wear. And when it came to the Ivy Leagues, I was like, A, they're ridiculously expensive and they weren't going to give my kids any scholarships. And we were just like, is it worth it? And now my daughter, she's in debate. So she goes to compete against all these top Ivy Leagues a lot of time. And I'm like, well, you should make some friends. And she's like, I don't like those people. I don't want to make friends with them. They're not, because I think at the end of the day, those kids they grew up in an environment where they have all of these types of attitudes and problems and such. And they just don't know how to live life, right? It's like you talked about. They're living in museums. They're stuck. And so money is not always the answer. And I think a big part of what you said is just enjoying the journey, because that's where the fun is, where the growth is, where the challenge comes, where you're constantly improving yourself and making yourself better. You've talked a lot about self-growth. Is there a particular book or something that you've read or seen that had a big impact on you?
Yeah, actually, so it's a great book. It's called Living with a Seal, and it's written by a guy named Jesse Itzler. So Jesse Itzler, he's from a very middle class background on Long Island, totally self-made, and so he ended up creating the company Marquis Jet, where they had the you could buy shares of a corporate jet and basically use it at various times. He then started Zico Water, the coconut water. He's married to Sarah Blakely, who created Spanx. So amazing. I definitely see them as role models. But the book Living with a Seal, it's about after his first exit. He was living a life of pleasure. He had private planes. They had private chefs. They had houses in multiple locations, and he ended up doing a race. It was a 100-mile race that he was doing with a bunch of friends, and it was out. They went to San Diego, and they had it catered by Whole Foods, and they had their own little tents, and they had a masseuse with them. And he noticed that in this race, there was a guy next to them who was doing the race solo, that had a long chair, a bottle of water, and a box of crackers, and did the 100-mile race by himself. And he said, who is this guy? So he ended up finding out who this guy was, and he was a former Navy SEAL. And Jesse Itzler ended up getting in touch with him and invited him to live with he and Sarah for a month on their Upper West Side penthouse. But the stipulation was that Jesse had to do whatever the SEAL told him to do. And it was a book about Jesse kind of reintroducing Jesse to pain and personal growth from a physical standpoint. And he documents the journey, and it's amazing to see what he was able to do from a physical standpoint. But one thing, and I'm not going to ruin it for the listeners, but one thing that he said is, he had private jets, multiple homes, chefs, everything he wanted. This Navy SEAL shows up with just a backpack, and Jesse says, I wanted everything that he had.
We always want what somebody else has, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that never ending human desire. And it's funny because the guy had nothing, right? He had a backpack and a bottle of water, but it was that inner peace and that inner confidence in that ability to do those things. Here's the thing, though, that people need to realize, right? In order to be that SEAL, you have a price to pay.
No doubt.
Most people aren't willing to pay the price, or they're not. they don't want the consequences of that price.
Yep.
And so you've got to be crystal clear of what is it you truly want? What is the price that it takes to get that? And are you willing to pay the price? Because if you're not, let's just cross it off and go build the life of your dreams in your own way. Like for me, you're never going to find me running a marathon. It's not my thing, right? I'm not going to climb mountains. It's like, I know that people put success, like they value that. But for me, I'm like, I don't value that. And I'm okay with that. I value my things, which are different. And I think my biggest struggle is letting go of the ego of saying, okay, you don't value that. You value this. Who cares if anyone else values what you value? And you just got to do it for your own sake. And don't worry about everybody else. Just let go.
I totally agree with you. And it's funny you say that because, as part of my practice, and I have a chapter in the book about the fact that it's really important for us to reconnect to areas of personal growth. And I talk about that we are living a life that has been designed for pleasure. And brands and marketers know this, and they exploit it on a day-to-day basis. And they know that we will pay for pleasure. And by exploiting this need for pleasure, the friction points between us and spending our money are basically non-existent today, where you can be sitting on your couch, you can get an alert on your phone, you can press one button on your watch, and you can have 30 pairs of shoes delivered a day later with free shipping. I mean, our life has been designed for convenience. And oftentimes it's not uncommon in my coaching business where, I get people who are high earners, they're making six figures, they're, accountants, attorneys, whatever, and they're in credit card debt and just not very happy. And one thing I talk about is you need to reconnect to more pain. And I say pain as being a word that I use for personal growth. So when I say you need to connect to pain, you need to find something that scares you a little bit. Your life is too convenient. You're waking up every day, you're eating a Pop-Tart, driving 45 minutes to work, sitting at a desk all day, eating bad food in the pantry, eating lunch at your desk, and then you're driving home, you're eating dinner with the family, and then you're sitting on a couch. That's what a lot of people do on a day-to-day basis. And it gets us trapped in a cycle of consumption on a whole bunch of different levels. So I talk to people about the importance of reconnecting to personal growth. And I loved what you said about your own values is I can think of, for me, again, I like sports and I like physical challenges, but I've had clients who have signed up to be a part of a community theater project because they're more into the arts. And they needed to get out of a rut. So it's, you liked acting as a kid. Why don't you sign up to be a part of a community theater? And you know what? Feel that nervous energy about having to get up on stage and perform. Reconnect to that area of personal growth. And I tell you, when people do that, their life changes.
You got to go back to your childhood dreams and just go live them.
And that doesn't mean you have to be on Broadway. It doesn't mean you have to be in the Olympics, but it means you can reconnect to what lit you up as a kid. And I can think of one client in particular, again, who's not an athlete and is not going to run a marathon. And not say you have to be an athlete to run a marathon, but meaning that he wasn't interested in it. And in no way, shape, or form am I saying that you have to do some sort of physical adventure. In this case, it was, again, signing up for a part of a community theater, having to memorize lines, you're part of a community, you're getting up on stage, you're performing, there's a nervous excitement, there's an energy to it. And the crazy thing is, like, when he did that, he ended up, he stopped consuming so much. He stopped just buying gadgets and toys to kind of to light him up. He actually started getting healthier. He started walking more, like during his lunch break. He actually started exercising just at a very small level. But just embracing one area of personal growth got him re-engaged of what it was like to be excited.
And that's very true. If you have success in one part of life like that and you make that change, it starts to roll over into all parts of your life. And it's a process. It takes time. It takes years. It's a never ending journey. And for me, I love it. And for me, it's more of, rather than physical toughness, I want mental toughness.
That's right.
And eventually, well, I'll never get there, because there'll always be a new level.
Always,
but I will keep going on that journey.
Mm-hmm.
We always like to get people to take action. So what's one thing people can do this week to move forward in their life?
I think it goes back to what are the areas of personal growth in your life? And if there's something that's missing, re-engage with that. So if you're someone where sports lit you up as a kid, how can you re-engage with a sport or start a new sport? How can you re-engage with a hobby or start a new hobby? How, if you feel like you're not necessarily growing as a person, that you don't have a lot of challenges in front of you, how can you create that? And how can you focus on growing in one part of your life? And I think so much of it is just re-engaging with some sort of hobby or activity.
And when you have something that you truly desire and is fun, it's no longer work. It's just fun. And even though it's hard, it becomes fun.
I mean, I tell you, I mentioned that I knew I didn't want to work in a corporate setting anymore, that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. But at the same time, I had to give myself 2 years because we had to repair our balance sheets. And we wanted to plan for it. Again, we didn't want to just necessarily blow our life up. And I signed up for a marathon. And the marathon, I wasn't a runner. I played basketball growing up, but I was never a runner. I actually didn't like running. But I always admired people who ran marathons. And I said, you know what, I want to be in that club. And I tell you that signing up for a marathon and running a marathon has taught me so much. And I think about my career now as a business owner and the lessons I've learned from running a marathon. I use those lessons every single day in growing this business.
And that's really cool.
100%. So it is all because I decided, you know what, I need to grow in somewhere in my life. And again, I can't necessarily leave my job right now, but what I can do is I can do something hard that's also really exciting.
It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
It's a really good question. And I think it comes down to the question I asked earlier. What do you want? Your wants can't be material things. They can't be more money. And when people go through that exercise, it's almost always a combination of they want closer personal connections. They want more love. They want more independence. They want more freedom. They want more autonomy. So define what you want and then start designing your days and your life to deliver more on these wants.
And I have most of my clients go through a book called Living Forward, which takes you through the process of defining what is my ultimate life and what does it look like? Where am I today? And then taking the steps to move through that process. Because I think that's the biggest struggle for people is actually defining what they want. No one's ever made them sit down and do that. No one's gone through that process.
It doesn't mean every day is perfect.
No.
But I'll tell you, like a perfect day for me, I wake up, my wife and I, we usually spend at least a half hour to an hour or so just chatting in the morning. It's really important. We prioritize a relationship first. I love going for a run. And by the way, it's obviously, I live in New York City. There's some days it's 30 degrees and there's a strong headwind. That's still a perfect day because I'm outside, I'm exercising, working on my business. That doesn't mean that every day I get a new client or that the market's up or that things are going well. But my days are now designed in a way that I have meaning, purpose, and connection. And it's aligned with what I want in life and what I value.
And that's what it's all about. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
I think the importance of always growing and the importance of doing hard things the hard way. And I think for me, I fell into a trap at one point of checking the boxes, putting together a resume. And I think part of it goes back to our earlier discussion of when our family when we started to live more of an affluent life, and we were living in a nice house, and expectations for the school and what college you're going to go to, etc. So much became about putting together a resume. And I can tell you that for the longest time, I think especially after we moved into that house, I became what I'll call very fluffy, where I became very focused on just checking the boxes and making sure I get it on my resume without building the foundation. And one thing that's really changed for me is the importance of building a strong foundation. And that comes down to doing hard things the hard way, not cutting corners.
People don't want to do hard, right? They want easy.
They want easy, but the good stuff's the hard.
That is so true. If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Most things in life aren't necessarily good or bad. They just are. And regardless of the circumstances around you, you can always, and you always have to choose to take the next step. And again, an outcome that just happened, in the scheme of things, it might be good, it might be bad. It doesn't matter. Take the next step.
And that is true. You just take one step at a time, and that's how you achieve success. You just keep showing up. And as long as you do, and you keep going the direction you want, it will eventually happen. Mm-hmm. If people would like to learn more about the book, find you and connect, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I think go to my personal website, ryansterling.com. It has a link to buy the book. You can also just go to Amazon to buy the book. The book's called You're Making Other People Rich. But again, if you want to engage with me, go to ryansterling.com. On social media, the platform I'm most active on is LinkedIn. So find me, Ryan Sterling, on LinkedIn. And again, I think between my website, LinkedIn, and the book, those are the best places to find me.
And I will put that all in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It was great to be on. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Clearly, being rich is not all it's cracked up to be. And it's hard for the kids. Many of them end up in psychiatric offices with a lot of emotional problems. I personally would hate to live in a museum. We did have nice things when the kids were growing up, but they also had their own space to play through much of the house. We were intentional in teaching them to stand on their own 2 feet because I've seen too often the curse of wealth. We also chase too much. Know your number and learn to tame your ego and walk away. Remember to enjoy the journey because that is where the fun is. We should be strong enough that we don't need much. A lot of that comes back to my Stoic philosophy and of realizing this too shall pass. This week's action step: what are the areas of personal growth in your life? Is there something missing? Re-engage with that. Re-engage with some sort of hobby or activity or something that's fun. The world is changing fast, and the way to face that is to grow personally. It works, and you're never too old to keep going. Once you clearly define what you want, it becomes so much easier to achieve it. It does take time, and you just have to keep going. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would appreciate you sharing it with someone you think would also enjoy it. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.